From war rooms to peace talks, from iconic speeches to top secret strategies, the Oval Office had witnessed it all. But here's something you might not expect. Tucked among the flags, busts, and books, there have been models. Yep, ship models to be exact. Intricately crafted, proudly displayed, these little ships have quietly shared space with some of the biggest moments in American history. But why ships? Why bring a miniature frigate or battleship into the most powerful room in the world? Let's dive into the fascinating stories behind the Oval Office ship models and the president who chose them. The Oval Office, as you may know, is the president's official working space, located in the west wing of the White House. The original version was built in 1909 under President William Howard Taft, but the one we see today was rebuilt and relocated in 1934 during Franklin D. Roosevelt's term. It's famous for its elegant oval shape, the historic Resolute desk, and the views of the Rose Garden. But it's also a very personal space. Every president leaves their mark by customizing the decor, choosing rugs, artwork, curtains, and yes, sometimes ship models. These models aren't just decoration, they reflect the president's identity, values, and even messages they want to send. From honoring naval history to expressing patriotism or personal connection. So, who were the president who brought ships into the Oval Office? What vessels did they choose? And what did those choices say about them? Let's set sail through history and find out.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
President Franklin D. Roosevelt wasn't just a leader in wartime. He was a lifelong naval enthusiast, a former Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and a man with a deep love for the sea. During his time in the White House, FDR curated a remarkable collection of ship models, each one reflecting a personal connection to history, heritage, or service. While we don't have clear evidence of ship models placed directly in the Oval Office, several of his favorites were proudly displayed in his private study and family quarters in the White House, just steps away from the seat of power. Let's take a look at the few of the most notable ships in his collection. USS Constitution. One of FDR's most prized ship models was the USS Constitution, also known as Old Ironsides. He bought it in 1914 and even rigged it by hand, a clear sign of how personal it was to him. It stayed as the centerpiece in his White House study in his administration. But this model was more than a hobby piece. It symbolized American strength, resilience, and the naval tradition. The real USS Constitution was a hero of the War of 1812, famous for withstanding enemy fire, just like the country FDR led through depression and war. For FDR, it wasn't just a ship, it was a quiet, powerful reminder of the values he stood for. USS North Carolina. In 1937, FDR received the model of the USS North Carolina as a Christmas gift from the Secretary of the Navy. At the time, the real ship was still under construction, a symbol of America's growing naval power. For FDR, this model wasn't just a gift. It was a preview of the future fleet, a reminder of the strength the nation would need in the years ahead. Displayed in the White House study, it stood for innovation, preparedness, and the importance of naval strength in uncertain times. USS Macedonian. FDR acquired the model of the USS Macedonian in 1922, a frigate from the early 1800s known for its role in the War of 1812. He displayed it in the family quarters of the White House, a quiet nod to naval heritage and America's early maritime victories. For FDR, it reflected his deep respect for the sea and the long tradition of ships that came before his own era of command. Mary Isaac Dynamo. The Mary Isaac Dynamo wasn't just a model, it was a family heirloom, built around 1827 and gifted to FDR in 1933. The Mary Isaac Dynamo was a bark ship, used for carrying valuable cargo like spices and tea. It played a key role in early American merchant trade and showed off the country's shipbuilding skills. It had a deep personal meaning, tied to his maternal lineage, the Dynamo family, who had strong roots in maritime trade. Displayed in the White House, it served as a reminder of where he came from, a blend of heritage, history, and the sea. West Wind. The West Wind was a beautifully crafted clipper ship model, similar as other speedy transport clippers gifted to FDR during his presidency. It was displayed in the White House living quarters, admired for its detail and grace. Later, it even made its way to the 1939 New York World's Fair, a symbol of craftsmanship and American maritime spirit. For FDR, it was one more reminder of the sea's elegance and power, always close by. In total, FDR collected at least 20 known ship models and maritime artifacts, making his collection one of the most impressive ever held by a U.S. president. Today, many of these models live on at the Franklin D. Roosevelt's Presidential Library and Museum, where they continue to tell the story of a president who never drifted far from the sea.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Franklin D. Roosevelt wasn't the only president drawn to the sea. Just a few decades later, another leader with salt in his veins stepped into the Oval Office, John F. Kennedy. JFK didn't just admire ships, he commanded one. As a Navy lieutenant in World War II, he famously led PT-109, a patrol torpedo boat that was sunk and sunk in the Pacific. His heroism during that mission became central to his legacy. And when he arrived at the White House in 1961, that connection to the sea came with him, loud, proud, and personal. Inside the Oval Office, Kennedy surrounded himself with ship models, each one telling a piece of his story. USS Constitution. One of the first models on display was the USS Constitution, the same old Ironsides that FDR had cherished, but for JFK, it held a childhood memory, visiting the real ship with his grandfather, John F. Fitzgerald, who helped save it from demolition in 1896. For Kennedy, the model stood for strength, tradition, and the enduring legacy of the U.S. Navy. PT-109. No model was more personal than this. The PT-109 was the very boat Kennedy commanded during World War II. In August 1943, it was rammed by a Japanese destroyer. 2 crewmen were killed, and the survivors were left stranded. JFK swam miles towing a wounded sailor, holding the strap of his life jacket between his teeth. He earned the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for that act of courage. Having the PT-109 model in the Oval Office wasn't just a tribute to wartime service. It was a symbol of resilience, sacrifice, and leadership under fire. Denmark. On February 15, 1961, during a visit from the New York Herald Tribune World Youth Forum, a young Danish delegate, Kirsten Runge, presented JFK with the model of the training ship Denmark. Built in 1932, the full-rigged Denmark had trained generations of Danish cadets, and during World War II, when Denmark was occupied, the ship stayed in U.S. waters and was offered to the U.S. Coast Guard for training. The model later found its place in the Oval Office, symbolizing not just seafaring pride, but international friendship and shared values. For Kennedy, a sailor at heart, it was a fitting tribute. Sea Witch. One of the most eye-catching models in Kennedy's collection was the Sea Witch, a legendary American clipper ship launched in 1846. Designed for speed and long-distance trade, she broke records between China and the US, including a 74-day run from Hong Kong to New York. The model in JFK's office, painted green and brown, was a tribute to that spirit of innovation and exploration, a nod to maritime adventure and a reminder of America's bold ocean-crossing legacy. USS Wasp. Also on display, a model of the USS Wasp, a sloop of war launched in 1806. She earned her place in history by capturing the British sloop HMS Frolic during the War of 1812. Though she was later lost to the enemy, her daring actions left a lasting impression. Kennedy's model honored that fighting spirit and the early naval heritage that helped shape the country he now led. For President Kennedy, ship models weren't just decorations, they were stories. Stories of service, of sacrifice, of seafaring tradition, and his own journey from Navy lieutenant to commander-in-chief. Each one reminded him, and all who entered the Oval Office, of where he came from and what he stood for. After Kennedy's time in the White House, the winds of history shifted, but the ship models stayed. Lyndon B. Johnson wasn't a sailor, but he understood the power of symbols. When he assumed the presidency after JFK's assassination, he kept many of Kennedy's ship models in place, including the PT-109. For Johnson, the models weren't just decoration, they were a tribute. They honored JFK's legacy and served as a steady reminder of leadership during a time of national grief and change.
I was about the most popular officer in the South Pacific because of that hamburger stand. They were pretty good.
Richard Nixon brought his own energy to the Oval Office, strategic, pragmatic, and deeply aware of the weight of history. While Nixon didn't serve at sea like Kennedy or Roosevelt, he was a Navy man too, stationed in the Pacific during World War II as the supply officer. So when he stepped into the Oval Office, he didn't just sweep away the ship models. Instead, he selected his own. Nixon kept a few key naval models on display, including a refined version of old Ironsides, continuing that quiet reverence for American naval strength. He also added the model of USS Sequoia, not a warship, but a presidential yacht. Nixon spent time aboard of the Sequoia holding meetings, reflecting, even making critical decisions. The model was a symbol of a presidential tradition and the quieter side of naval life, leadership on the water, not just from the war room. Though his presidency was marked by foreign policy moves like opening China and ending US involvement in Vietnam, Nixon understood the stage, the Oval Office, like the bridge of a ship, needed a presence, poise, and symbols of command. The ship models, new and old, helped to tell that story. Even though President Gerald Ford served with distinction in the US Navy during World War II, there is no confirmed evidence that he displayed ship models in the Oval Office during his presidency. Some photos suggest that there might have been maritime themes decor, but nothing has been clearly documented. Still, Ford's connection to the sea ran deep, so much so that the Navy honored him with their aircraft carriers bearing his name, the USS Gerald R. Ford. While ship models may not have filled his office, his legacy sailed on, literally.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The next U.S. president known to display a ship model in the Oval Office was George H.W. Bush, and that's no surprise, considering his deep personal connection to life at sea. At just 18 years old, Bush became one of the youngest Navy pilots in World War II. He flew off aircraft carriers like the USS San Jacinto, survived being shot down over the Pacific, and carried those experiences with him for the rest of his life. That lifelong bond with the Navy naturally found its way into the White House. During his presidency, one confirmed ship model displayed in the Oval Office was the legendary USS Constitution. That choice reflected more than just the history. It reflected Bush's value, duty, service, resilience, and tradition. He didn't just admire ships, he had lived that life. Now here's something interesting. While Bush didn't use the famous Resolute desk in the Oval Office, he opted instead for the C&O desk, the same one he'd used as vice president. There has been some speculation about another ship model possibly joining the Constitution. Some believe Bush also displayed a model of HMS Resolute, the very British Arctic ship that gave its name to the Resolute desk. It's a nice thought, and it would have made perfect symbolic sense. But here's the thing. I haven't found any official photos and records confirming that HMS Resolute model was actually placed in the Oval Office during his term. It might have been there at some point, or maybe it was kept elsewhere, like Camp David or his personal study. So take that as more of the fun side note than a confirmed fact. Let's pause for a moment and talk about why that model would have mattered. To understand the symbolism behind the Resolute desk, you have to go back to the story of the ship itself. HMS Resolute was a British Royal Navy ship, part of the mission to find the lost Arctic explorer Sir John Franklin. In 1854, the ship became trapped in ice and was abandoned. A year later, an American whaling vessel found it drifting and the US government had it restored, then returned it to Queen Victoria as a diplomatic gesture of goodwill. In 1880, when the ship was finally retired, Queen Victoria had a timber made into a grand desk and gifted to the President of the United States. The Resolute desk has since become one of the most iconic symbols of the American presidency. Bush may not have used it in the Oval Office, but he didn't ignore its meaning. He simply had a different working style. The C&O desk gave him more space and comfort, especially as a taller man, and it suited how he liked to work. Beyond the White House, Bush also had a couple of personal ship models displayed at Camp David. The most famous one? A model of the USS Finback, the very submarine that rescued a young Lieutenant George H.W. Bush in 1944 after he was shot down during a bombing mission over the Pacific. That model wasn't just decorative, it was personal. A quiet tribute to survival, sacrifice, and the man he served with. After President George H.W. Bush, there have been whispers that President Barack Obama may have briefly displayed a model of the USS Constitution during his Oval Office redesign around 2010. And as for President Joe Biden, well, some photos from 2021 seem to show a Constitution model in the Oval Office too. But here is the catch. There is no official documentation and no clear public photos or video footage to back that up. It's one of those quiet details of White House decor that might have come and gone unnoticed. Still, one thing is certain. Old Ironsides remains the timeless symbol. She is not just a historic worship. She is a living monument to America's naval heritage and resilience. And when it comes to model ship building, the USS Constitution is pretty much the crown jewel. Nearly every wooden model kit brand offers some version of her. She is the flagship, literally and figuratively. Big, complex, and packed with detail. She demands time, patience, and respect. My first goal at building a USS Constitution is actually from Agro Models. It's a rare one, possibly the only Admiralty-style Constitution kit available on the market today. And as I work through each plank and cannon, it's more than just modeling. It's like connecting piece by piece with the deeper chapter of American history. And that's what I love most about building ships like this. You don't just create something beautiful. You learn, you reflect, and you gain a whole new appreciation for the past. Thanks for watching, and if you are building your own old Ironsides or any ship models that we covered in today's video, let me know in the comments. I'd love to see how yours is coming along. Until next time, fair winds and happy building.